I have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Xi. We're in the final throes of a very important deal. I guess you could say one of the most important deals in trade ever. It's going very well, but at the same time, we want to see it go well in Hong Kong, and I think it will. I think that President Xi can make that happen, and I know him, and I know he'd like to make it happen.
President Trump on China, and guess what? Stocks hit an all-time high again today as two major trade deals seem to be moving closer to resolutions. President Trump sounding optimistic on China trade negotiations as Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Trade Rep Robert Lighthizer held a Phase 1 phone call with Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, with Chinese negotiators upbeat, saying, quote, a consensus had been reached. Here now is Lou Dobbs, host of Lou Dobbs Tonight at 7 p.m. right here on FBN. Great to see you, Lou.
Great
Thanks
to
for
be with
being
you.
here.
Thank you.
So could we see a China deal signed before year's end?
Well, I'm told we could, and
Should
I'm told
we?
that it's a high probability, but I'm very skeptical right now because it hasn't come together, and it's had plenty of opportunity to come together. We had the renege in May, then we saw this thing fall apart in October. We're in late November. I remain skeptical.
Lou, it's John Layfield here. It's an honor to have you on the show, sir. We have had reports almost for the last 20 months. Every single month it seems like a deal is imminent. And you're right, President Xi reneged on a deal earlier in the year. What has to be done for a deal to be signed? Because it seems as the U.S. has been negotiating, but China backed out. It just seems like we're very far apart, and they're becoming more entrenched in what they believe in.
The president, I think, has to be, I know, has to be convinced that there will be an enforcement mechanism that is convincing and absolutely as ironclad as such a guarantee can be. They're not there yet by every understanding I have from every source I have. So there's a long way to go here. And you mentioned those 3 years that the president has been in office. The Chinese have, count them, said that they will indeed enforce all restrictions against the theft of U.S. intellectual property 22 times in that 3-year period. So, again, that's part of the reason I remain somewhat skeptical.
Lou, it's Carol Roth. You know, obviously this is a very critical time of year in terms of planning for businesses as they go into the next calendar year. Whether or not we actually get a deal signed by the end of the year, does the fact that there's ongoing discussions, that things seem to be going well, at least prevent the concern that there is going to be an escalation of this war and give the businesses confidence in making the investments that they need to make for next year?
You know, I think that's a terrific question, and I think the answer is we have watched this negotiation take place over the course of almost a year and a half. High tariffs put on, we were told by the literati and the Illuminati that we would see great anxiety, volatility in the markets, and that it would be impossible to sustain growth, that markets would be destabilized. And here we are, 100 records later in the stock market, $11 trillion added to this market since he was elected. With tariffs, there is no doubt that the president has a great record to run on tariffs. So I don't think that that kind of anxiety is something that we could reasonably anticipate. I don't think it would be deleterious to the advance of the market whatsoever.
Lou, it feels like in some ways it's politics versus policy, that the president wants to have policy done if he can put out the hammer, but he loves the idea that there's no deal because it's great for his politics. The idea that he's kind of putting China out as the boogeyman continually. Yeah. So it feels to me that in some ways maybe he doesn't want this deal as we go into 2020.
I can understand why you'd say that, Bob, but I also think that there is no question this president wants a deal. He would not negotiate in bad faith. He has reached out to President Xi. He's been very accommodating, even ZTE. He relented on those strictures and sanctions against ZTE, but in the interest of goodwill and good faith, he gave them a reprieve.
Just to add to that, do you think he would ever sign a deal that didn't put the hammer on intellectual property?
No, I absolutely. The theft of intellectual property. I can't even imagine that circumstance.
So there are two things here. One, the strength of the markets and the strength of the underlying economy are not, as you know, the same thing. And the tariffs have been in place, or at least the really higher levels of tariffs have been in place for about 5 months. We're already seeing considerable economic weakness in the fourth quarter. I'm not saying that's entirely a product of the tariffs.
You mean
but fourth quarter GDP is going to come in at about 1 to 1.5%, according to the Dallas Fed and all current readings.
That would be an Obama norm, I believe.
Well, regardless, Obama, last I checked, is no longer president. Therefore, it's retroactive. So you do have this issue of, it is true that tariffs have not had the bite that they've had, partly because we're subsidizing the farmers for their effects. But the longer this goes on, particularly if they then ratchet up in December and January with an economy that is in a slowing cycle, again, I'm not saying that that's a product of that, that becomes a very challenging prospect going into 2020.
It's a challenging prospect, and I'm glad to hear that you're concerned about the president's political fortunes.
No, I was concerned about the economy going into 2020.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the market right now is roaring. The unemployment rate across the board is at historic lows.
Correct.
If you're dissatisfied and agitated by that, I don't know what to do to salve you, because the fact of the matter is this economy is strong. It has immense prospects. This president is driving this policy on economic growth forward, deregulating, and the fact of the matter is, it's a very positive environment. I can't relieve your anxiety, but I can tell you, right now, I feel very strongly about the prospects for this economy.
Well, and it's not just the China trade deal that we're looking at. We're all looking at USMCA as well, the Mexican-Canadian trade deal. House Speaker Pelosi apparently told a Mexican trade official that a USMCA compromise could be reached between Thanksgiving and the end of November. Now, if you have a calendar close by, you should look at this. That only leaves 2 days between Thanksgiving and the end of November. Lou, what's going on here?
Well, we now know that the window is 48 hours, and Pelosi has targeted it for us.
And those 2 days, by the way, Congress is not in session, just so folks know.
Well, I think that we're going to see a lot of time expire before we get to USMCA. She's made it very clear she does not want this president to have anything that could be construed as a win. I think she's playing the worst kind of cynical politics in so doing, but that it's no more cynical than impeaching a president whose record is historic and whose offense is simply zero. The man has done everything we could ask of a president, and the Democrats and the radical left want to impeach, and she doesn't want to, in point of fact, ratify what will be an even larger trade deal than the U.S. China trade deal.
Robert, let me just ask you, what do Democrats, if there is not a USMCA, there have been a lot of smaller bills that have passed that haven't really risen to public prominence, but what can Democrats bring to voters in November of 2020 and say, this Congress did this under Nancy's leadership?
Well, Lou and I agree on some things. This is one we do agree on. USMCA should be passed. They should pass it because it's good for the country. It's an iteration of NAFTA. I would say I was in Washington meeting with both Republicans and Democrats recently, and both sides have a few issues on labor standards, environmental standards, and regulatory standards. What's the rule of law of what happens with Mexico versus the U.S. and so on and so forth. So there's still a few bumps in the road. They should be able to rectify. If there was an up and down vote, it would be actually approved. That being said, Congress has put 400 bills on the Senate desk that are just still sitting there. Gun reform would be passed if there was an up and down vote. So there are many things that actually could be approved today if the Senate actually went back.
But you are saying USMCA should be put on the Senate's desk as well.
And so should others. They should be. I'm supportive of us proceeding here.
Well, we couldn't stay in agreement too long.
No, absolutely. I said one. I said one thing. I said one thing we agreed on.
We got close. We got close to that.
I think we've known each other for
Lou
decades.
Dobbs,
absolutely.
Go ahead. Final word.
Well, just that I think the prospects here are excellent to see some real progress made. I do think that the Democrats will come to, this is reciprocity, by the way. I think the Democrats will have to come to their senses if they're to have any chance of running competitively next year for the presidency, and therefore I think that there is a real chance in 2020 we'll see some serious
bipartisan.
Quickly, who do you have on tonight?
some serious business done. Well, we're going to have a lot of good folks and a great time.
Wait, is Robert Wolf on that list?
Let me see.
Well, Michael Pillsbury.
We'll be talking about exactly the issue of the night, and that is China and the prospects for that deal.
Lou Dobbs, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thank you, gentlemen.